Welcome to the Catholic Community Scripture Study, held at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church in Jackson, Michigan. I will be your host, Todd Gale, as we walk our way through the book of Genesis, a line-by-line study of the first book of the sacred scriptures. Hello, my friends. Grace and peace be with you. Welcome back as we're looking at the great book of Genesis. Several chapters back, Ishmael was given a few paragraphs with the name of his descendants, and then he kind of vanishes from the pages of the Bible. Well, now the same thing happens with Esau, except Esau gets a whole chapter in Genesis, and not only that, there's an entire book of the Bible dedicated to Esau and the Edomites. Do you know which one that is? You ever thought about this? There's a small book, the smallest, actually, the shortest Old Testament book, only has 21 verses, the minor prophet Obadiah. Obadiah is a book of judgment and prophetic, divine judgment against the Edomites. Biblical scholars call him the poet of justice, one of the most powerful messages of judgment in the entire Bible. His judgment is against the people of Edom and the restoration of the house of Jacob, the house of Israel. Even though they're cousins to the Israelites, the Edomites, these cousins, they had formed alliances with Israel's enemies. In fact, they joined forces with the Babylonians when the southern kingdom was taken away. For all of their wicked actions against his people, God calls down divine judgment on Edom. They were also known by the Greek term for the Edomites, the Idumeans. The most famous Idumean or Edomite was Herod the Great, appointed king of Judea by the Romans, right? Today, this region of Seir, this region of Edom, has become almost completely unoccupied except for a few Bedouin shepherds and a couple military outposts. The kingdom, the culture, the people have been virtually obliterated, as Obadiah had prophesied. Isn't that interesting? So in this entire chapter, the descendants of Esau are listed with three different major groups. There's Esau's descendants, the chiefs and the leaders that come from his lineage. There's another family that's mentioned beginning in verse 20, Seir, the Horite, and his kids. It looks like they may have been the indigenous people. They were the original people in that territory before Esau's people moved in. And there was a lot of intermarriage, so the Bible author thought it important to include them. Then there's a list of the kings who ruled the territory. Now, this is very, very interesting because notable among this list in verse 12 is a man named Amalek. From him come the Amalekites. So Amalek is Esau's grandson, but Esau's son, Eliphaz, does that name sound familiar? Eliphaz was one of the friends of Job in the book of Job. And here's something that's very intriguing. In verse 31 onward, there's a list of the kings, the rulers, the men of wealth. And one of these is named Jobab, the son of Zerah. Many have supposed that Jobab might be Job from the book of Job, and that Eliphaz, the son of Esau, was one of the friends mentioned in Job. There's no proof of any of this. It doesn't fit perfectly, but it's just very interesting that those names show up. And many scholars believe the book of Job comes shortly after the time of Abraham, as far as when Job actually lived. Now we walk into then chapter 37. Joseph is really introduced in this chapter, begins his amazing story, the Joseph cycle, it's sometimes called. Joseph is a type for Jesus, for Christ. He's the firstborn son of Rachel, and Jesus is the firstborn son of Mary. Joseph is the beloved son of Jacob, and Jesus is the beloved son of God. Joseph is sold to Gentiles for silver pieces by 11 brothers. Jesus is sold to Gentiles for silver pieces and abandoned by 11 disciples. Judah is the chief deceiver of Joseph. Judas is the chief deceiver of Jesus. Joseph's garments are stripped from him, and Jesus' garments are stripped from him. Joseph is with 2 condemned men in prison, of whom one is pardoned. Jesus is condemned with 2 men on crosses, of whom one is pardoned. Joseph is exalted to the right hand of the Pharaoh and rules over the kingdom of Egypt, and Jesus is exalted over the right hand of God, or exalted to the right hand of God, and rules over the kingdom of heaven. Joseph saves Israel and the Gentiles from death and feeds them life-giving wheat, while Jesus saves Israel and the Gentiles from spiritual death and feeds them with eternal life-giving bread. Joseph is revealed to brothers who didn't recognize him at first, and Jesus is revealed to disciples that didn't recognize him at first. Joseph gives a special honor to Benjamin, the youngest of the brothers, at a banquet, and Jesus gives a special place of honor to the youngest disciple, John the Evangelist, at the Last Supper. Mostly, we see here in the story of Joseph, sort of like Jesus. I mean, Jesus obviously is by far the primary one of this, but we see in Joseph no moral shortcomings, no major sin. In the whole story of Joseph, we see one of the only characters in the Bible where there is nothing majorly wrong with him. I mean, there's a few things we can read in, a few things that might look like it on the surface. But there's a New Testament man named Joseph, who's named after this guy, Joseph, who has no recorded shortcomings. He has a dream or two. He flees to Egypt for protection, and he's also central to the story of salvation. Obviously, Joseph, as in Mary and Joseph, as in the Holy Family, that Joseph is named after this Joseph. So Jacob favors his son Joseph. Joseph's 17 years old when the story begins. He never complains. He never compromises. Israel loved him more than his other children. Now, his sons are all from 4 different mothers. They're all living together and working together, and there was a lot of rivalry. There was a lot of competition. You can just imagine how tense this family was. Yet Jacob was a clear favorite. Yet Jacob had a clear favorite, and that would be Joseph, who is the son of his old age. I'll try really hard not to mix these names up. These names are starting to get to be so many, right? You'd think that Jacob would have learned by now that having families with animosity and tension, like, it just ends poorly. But what God does with this is God works in and through these difficult and messed up family situations. Joseph was shepherding with the brothers from Zilpah and Bilhah, so that would be Dan, Naphtali, Asher, and Gad. And Joseph brought back a bad report to his father. There's no details. We're assuming there was some laziness or some bullying or maybe even some theft. We don't know. But Joseph's the tattletale. I don't think he's doing it to be mean. He's not doing it to be corrupt in any way. He's just kind of an innocent, naive kid. Well, his father makes a tunic for him. A tunic of many colors is what it's sometimes translated as. But this tunic extends all the way down to the wrists and all the way down to the ankles. as opposed to shorter workmen's clothes. This shows favoritism of Joseph in a way that was plain to everyone, including Joseph himself. It was an outward display of favor. This was not a pair of blue jeans. This was not what working men wore. This was a garment of privilege and status. The man who wore a tunic like this, perhaps with many colors, for sure it was long and beautiful and made of wonderful material. This man did not do hard physical labor. This signified a position of princely standing, of birthright. It was a dramatic way of saying that he was the son favored most. He was the son most likely to get the birthright from his father Jacob. And the other brothers hated him. They couldn't speak nicely of him at all. When they saw what was happening, they knew that he was going to inherit the most. So Joseph has a dream, and he tells it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. At best, Joseph showed a great lack of tact. But is he bragging? Is he boasting? Is he rubbing in their nose in it? You notice he doesn't interpret the dream. He simply tells them what it is that he sees. I think he's just very naive and innocent. He has no idea why this would be so offensive. Joseph does not seem to have a lot of tact, a lot of people skills. He doesn't read people very well. But he had dreamed that basically the brothers are all bowing down to him. And they say, what, are you going to reign over us? The brothers understood perfectly the meaning of this dream, that one day Joseph would reign over all of them. Now notice this involves wheat. The image is that there are sheaves of wheat, big stalks of wheat that are bowing. Joseph's ultimate position of status over his brothers will be connected with grain, will be connected with food, and they will bow to him because of the grain and because of the food. Well, in verse 9, then we see that Joseph has a second dream. If he wasn't very wise to tell the first dream, then it's very, very bad to tell the second. And this time the sun and the moon, the stars, everybody bows down to the one. And even Jacob gets a little offended here. He goes, shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed, shall we all bow down to you? Even Jacob's a little offended. But Jacob is pondering these things in his heart. He's thinking about this. So in verse 12, Jacob sends Jojo to go find his brothers as they're keeping sheep. And they're keeping sheep where? In Shechem? You've got to be kidding me. Shechem? What are they doing back there? That's where Dinah was assaulted. That's where two of the boys murdered an entire family. Are they nuts to go back to Shechem? There must be something about that area, that city, that keeps drawing the boys. Something about that culture. So Jacob calls him, and Jojo, the son, says, yes, Dad, here I am. The common response of a man that's following God, right? That's following orders. And Jacob says to him, please go see if things are good with your brothers and bring back word to me. Then there's a couple of verses about a strange man that he meets, and the man asks him, what are you seeking? That kind of sounds sort of like Jesus, like, what are you looking for? And he said, I'm seeking my brothers. And he says, please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, I heard them say, let's go up here to Dothan, right? So this is a strange man who seemed to have overheard the brothers. He knew exactly where they were. He just mysteriously shows up and then disappears. Jewish tradition says this strange man is an angel. He's not mentioned again. We don't know, but it kind of fits the whole story of Genesis where angels pop up here and again. So Joseph goes with his coat of many colors and long sleeves, and he goes to supervise his brothers. And it's about a 10 to 15 mile walk west of Shechem. And when the brothers see him afar off, they conspire to kill him. That same verb is used of Cain and Abel, so it means murder. And what's very interesting, this is like a reversal or a negative of the prodigal son story. The loving father is waiting and he's looking for his son, and he sees his son in the distance and he goes running to him. This is anything but a father's love running, right, to meet him. This is shocking. And we shouldn't lose our sense of shock about this. They didn't conspire just to tease him or to bully him or to kick him around a little bit. They wanted to kill him, to murder their little brother. This sin was in their heart way before they ever acted on it. It's one of the things about sin. It comes out of our heart and it manifests into an action that's usually so much worse. Jesus is clear about this. Murder comes from hatred, right? Deal with the anger first. Sexual sins come from lust. Deal with the heart that's lustful first. But here there's so much animosity, so much tension in their blood, they are willing to kill their brother. Let's say that a wild beast devours him, and their plan is to kill Joseph. They plot an excuse, and they don't detail which of the brothers had this idea first. It says that all of them. Now remember, in just a short time ago, Simeon and Levi murdered an entire family of men, right? They murdered all the men of Shechem like they know murder. But Reuben is the one, in verse 21, Reuben hears about it and he says, let's not kill him. Reuben, the oldest son, right? Let's not kill him. Let's throw him in the pit. So we don't have to actually murder him. He'll just die there. And the other brothers had a plan, but Reuben also had a plan. Reuben planned he would outsmart the other brothers, right? That he could have rose up. Reuben could have said, this is wrong. We can't do this. We want to be merciful. But no, he wants to please the brothers a bit who hate Joseph. But what he wants to do is when the brothers throw him in the pit and they leave, he wants to take Joseph out of the pit and he wants to be the hero to his dad, to bring Joseph back to his dad and say, look, I have saved him. This would make him look good in his father's eyes. Well, they strip him of his tunic, this tunic of many colors, right? This with lots of pleasure. Now Genesis doesn't mention any details really, but it amplifies this incident a little bit by telling us a little bit more about this robe once again. Right? So it's an important robe. And we see in this picture, we think of how Jesus was stripped of everything that he had before he was crucified. Jesus went up to the cross and Joseph went down to a pit. Each was stripped. Each was declared cursed. And they were put into a place that they seemingly could never get out on their own. Another connection to Jesus, right? He was thrown into a cistern. I don't want to go into all the detail on this. We talked about this back with the study of Matthew, and when Jesus was in Caiaphas's custody, just before he was taken to Pontius Pilate overnight, when he was held overnight, Jesus, the oral story goes, Jesus was also placed in a cistern, in a place of holding, which was very common for criminals. If you get an opportunity, you can go back and look at our study of Matthew and see where we talk about that. Well, the boys throw him in a pit, and then they sit down and they eat their meal. I mean, how totally heartless. And chances are, the food that they're eating was probably brought to them by Joseph. Later on in Genesis 42, The boys describe how guilty they were because they say themselves, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul, and when he pleaded with us, we did not hear him." So Joseph was cast into the pit. He pled with his brothers, and they ignored his cries as they ate their meal. Well, then, as they lift their eyes, they see a company of Ishmaelites coming along, coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices and myrrh. They're on their way to Egypt. And it's Judah's idea to sell his brother Jojo rather than kill him themselves. Let the other guys do the dirty work. Ishmaelites, right? These are from the tribe of Ishmael. They are cousins to the Israelites, right? The Ishmaelites. If you ever saw the play Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the Ishmaelites come in riding on motorcycles. They're like hell's angels, motorcycle riders, right? And they come in, a hairy bunch of Ishmaelites come in. We would call them Arab traders, right? They're distant cousins to Israel. The only way to describe the brothers here is cruel and cold. They decide if they're going to ruin so many lives, they might as well make some money off it. Now notice the plan comes from Judah, who of all the brothers is the one that eventually is going to be blessed the most, the ancestor of the Messiah, right? Judah is going to be from the family line that all the kings are going to come from. Judah is the head of the family where the Messiah eventually comes from. As the story of Joseph develops, Judah will be the brother most changed by these events. A little teaser there, a little spoiler. So they plan to sell him into a life of slavery and tell their dad that he's dead. Oh, these are great brothers, right? Well, then it's a little confusing. In verse 28, it talks about Midianite traders are passing by. So the brothers pull Joseph up. They lift him out of the pit. They sell him to the Ishmaelites. But it says the Midianites pulled him up. What exactly is going on here? The Midianites are also cousins of the Ishmaelites. Midianites come from Abraham and his later wife Keturah after Sarah had died. Remember that? After Sarah had died, Abraham was very old. He had another wife, Keturah. One of her sons was Midian. The Midianites come from them. Some scholars think that these names were just used interchangeably, Midianites and Ishmaelites. And they were together, they intermarried, they traded together, they may have been in the same group, we don't really know. But others think that maybe just the Midianites stopped by and they helped Jojo out of the pit, and then and they're the ones that ended up saving him out of the pit and giving him to the boys, so and giving them to the Ishmaelites, so they're the ones that got the money. It's a little confusing as to how this exchange happened. But regardless, he ends up sold into slavery. And the brothers are laughing as the Ishmaelites went on their way to Egypt. They feel good that they didn't kill Joseph. And what they did was they purchased him for 20 shekels of silver. That's about 2 full years' wages, right? This is a lot of money. And the brothers covered their sin and they lied to Jacob. So then Reuben, it says, returns to the pit. Apparently, Reuben wasn't with them when they sold Joseph from the pit for some reason. He goes back to the cistern. He thinks he's going to save his little brother and then be the hero for dad. And he goes back and Joe's gone. They had torn his clothes, right? And now Reuben tears his clothes. It's an expression of horror, an expression of mourning. It means like, I am torn apart. This is a very Jewish thing. They rip their shirts, right? They rip their clothing. I'm torn apart by this. This tears me up. It's a sign of mourning. Joseph may as well be dead because the father who loved him so much will never see him again. And the boys go to this father that loved him so much and they lied to him. And they said, we found this. Do you know whether this is your son's tunic or not? I mean, how cruel can these boys be? Do they not know how this is breaking the heart of Jacob? And we can only imagine the father's pain losing his son because he's the one that told Joseph to go after the brothers and look for them. He would have been guilty for being the one to have sent him out on this dangerous mission. The wild carnivores in Palestine at this time would have included the wolf, the lion, the leopard, the cheetah, the jackal, and the bear. All of these wild animals were out and about at that time. Well, now Jacob tears his clothes as an expression of horror. Oh, this has ripped me apart. He's mourning now because he has lost his son. His grief is completely understandable. All of his sons and his daughters arose to comfort him. They're pretending to comfort him. Like how awful are these boys, right? And here's the crazy bit of irony that's a little bit of poetic justice, sort of. The brothers' deception was so similar to what Jacob had done. Jacob had used goats to deceive his own father, right? When Jacob deceived Isaac, when he stole the blessing, he had prepared a meal of goats. He had put the goat skins on his arms. And not only that the brothers had not only used goats, but the goat's blood, but the brothers also used the clothes of Joseph to deceive their father, just like their father Jacob had used the clothes of Esau to deceive his father Isaac. Jacob is now deceived by his sons who have sidetracked his favorite son. Lots of deception involving clothes, involving goats. Now the Midianites sold Joseph into Egypt. At this time, Egypt was a large and thriving kingdom. It had been a thriving empire for almost 1,000 years before Joseph ever came there. It's thought that the pyramids had been built hundreds of years before. When Joseph comes to Egypt, right, the empire is strong, and the Egyptians are very, very well known. They sold him to a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. The Egyptian name Potiphar means he whom Ra gave. Ra is one of their leading gods. He whom Ra gave. In the book of Romans, St. Paul tells us famously that all things work together in God's plans, right? All things work together. Why is God allowing this to happen? Partially, part of the reason why this is happening, part of the ways that God is working this together, God may be trying to take Israel out of the land of Canaan, right? He's taking them out of that land because his own people cannot seem to separate from the pagan world. So God arranges it so they're forced to leave from those godless people, from those Canaanites. And in their cruelty, they sell they sell Joseph to Egypt. And if you know the story, you know that they're all going to end up in Egypt, right? Maybe this was the only way that God could draw them out before they were completely intermarried with Canaanites, before the Israelites completely lost their identity. The irony is, in taking them out of Canaan and bringing them to Egypt, after 400 years, they're going to be so much a part of the Egyptian culture, God once again will have to remove them from a foreign culture. They'll be forced out of Egypt, and then God will be trying to rip Egypt out of their hearts, just as he tried to get the Canaanites, out of their hearts, right? What's really going on here? The issue is not really the Canaanites or the Egyptians. The issue is that the Israelites forget who they are over and over again. They keep taking on the false gods and the false practices of the cultures around them. And God is constantly saying, stop, don't be like them. Over and over, this is the story of Scripture. Stop, don't be like them. They become more and more like the pagans, and they fall and get messed up, and God saves them. And he says, don't be like them. But I'm not pointing a finger just at the Israelites, right? Can't we relate to this? Like, we all do this. I'm preaching to myself about this, right? Taking on the culture of the world around us. It's what we do. It's so easy. It's so easy for us to do this. It's so easy to be a Christian and still take on the world around us and the attachments around us. So much so that we forget who we are. And God says, stop, don't be like them. Now, there's a cliffhanger that and I'm going to leave a cliffhanger because this is where we're ending, but there's a cliffhanger, there's a breather, there's a distraction with a shift in the story now as the Genesis writer gives us some information that's very crucial to the rest of the Bible story. There's a vital link in the family of Judah that happens next. But this particular story, this next chapter, is placed here for a very clear reason. The sordid episode that's about to happen is intentionally put here. We're going to see the integrity of Joseph compared and contrasted with the integrity of his older brother Judah, right? We're going to see Judah and his father Jacob, right? And the contrast that's going to come from Joseph, right? A new storyline develops, and it's plopped down here so that we just see the mix of all these great characters. A truly holy man and several truly unholy men. So read ahead. I can't wait till we pick up next time. The next story is very cool, and it has lots of exciting, interesting things to share. Can't wait to share it with you. God bless you all. Please continue reading, and don't forget, let the word speak to you in your life so that it helps to lead all of us closer and closer to the kingdom. Amen. Thanks, everyone. God bless. Thank you so much for walking with us through this study of the book of Genesis.